Woo! Today we have a double feature. As an avid Webtoon reader, I'm always looking for new Webtoon series to read, and I've recently fallen in love with a couple of new series. My Gently Raised Beast, The Remarried Empress, and The Men of the Harem. And it's these last two that I want to talk about today. I've actually seen these series around, especially The Remarried Empress. But I never gave them a chance, not until very recently, of course. But I'm glad that I decided to read over them. For those unaware, since I've never talked about these series before, both The Remarried Empress and The Men of the Harem have similar settings and similar stories. Both take place in medieval-type settings with swords, magic, knights, kingdoms, emperors, empresses, and surprisingly and most importantly, consorts and mistresses. Both deal with the question, how does power affect how we love? Men of the Harem deals with this question rather directly when dealing with our main character's first love, Hyacinth. While both our main characters fall in love for each other rather quickly, Hyacinth had to deal with a rebellion from his half-brother, and after 2 years, Hyacinth rose to the throne and became an emperor. But it came at a grave cost. Marriage. Wait, no, hold on, that makes it sound like I'm trusting on marriage. Not my point. You see, when dealing with a rebellion, or really any type of war, you need all the help you can get. And the rebellion had that same mindset, getting the second largest army to help them. So Hyacinth had to get a larger army, turning to Duke Daga, who only agreed if Hyacinth would marry his daughter. Now of course our main character Latil is furious, and even when Hyacinth tells Latil that he still loves her and to give him 5 years, which is insane that he thinks she would say yes to, but that's not the point, she of course says no, and moves on with her life. Meanwhile, the Remarried Empress deals with Empress Novier Eli Trovi, long name but okay, who is already married, as she married her childhood friend. And while it was a marriage of convenience, they're still on relatively good terms. However, everything changed with this lady, Lady Rashta, who is disliked and given a relatively funny community name. And while eventually she does become the mistress to Navier's husband, Sovieshu, and it really only drives these two further apart, as they were never really connected to begin with. Sure, these two were amicable, but this new relationship only drives a wedge further into things. Now, like I said, these two stories deal with the question, how does power affect how we love? And since they both have a connected author, it means they both address the same question in separate ways. One being an eye for an eye, and the other one being forgive and forget. But something important to call out is how sucky these men are in these series. And it's men like these that make me understand the cell's perspective a little more. Now, why do these guys suck? Is it because they take mistresses and only marry due to deals? That's not really the problem here. Or at least not the problem due to the world these series take place in. Something important to note is morality and what is socially agreed upon. These are important to talk about here and now because they change our views on the series. In our world, it's pretty sucky to declare to have a mistress or to marry someone else due to a negotiation. However, we're not dealing with our world. Therefore, we're not dealing with our morals or our social standards. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know I like Unordinary. And I bring it up because it's a good example for this situation. The world of Unordinary is a world based on strength and power. Therefore, to show you have authority over someone is typically by showing your power or strength over them. This leads to a lot of kids fighting each other. And I mean, a lot. This is a far cry from our world, where any amount of fighting is viewed as immoral. However, due to the morals and social standards of the world of Unordinary, this is not only deemed as acceptable, but is expected in these schools. We may judge them, saying that they're terrible people for picking on weaker kids, but that's the norm in their world. The same thought process can be applied to the worlds of the Remarried Empress and the Men of the Harem. In terms of mistresses and consorts, which I think are the same, these things aren't really frowned upon. They typically expect these things from emperors. That's why it shouldn't be problematic to us when Latil from the men of the harem chooses to accept consorts, but is problematic when Sovietshu chooses Rashta to be his mistress. It's not because they're choosing a lover, but because of the situation they're in, because of how they did it, and because who they hurt. I mentioned the question, how does power affect how we love? And it's an interesting question when applied to our emperors, Emperor Sovietshu and Emperor Hyacinth. And both have an interesting and similar answer. Control. Let me explain. Sovietshu having a mistress isn't the problem we face. A mistress isn't on the same wavelength as an empress. One of these things is very, very much more important than the other. One helps lead a nation, and the other one is the lover of the emperor. However, Emperor Sovietshu treats them the same, and often treats Rashta better and with more importance, treating Navier often with hostility, negligence, or indifference. And a good question is why? And like I said before, it has to deal with control. Empress Navier is practically his equal. She's also in control of the kingdom. She has say in a lot and even creates many policies. However, it very clearly frustrates Emperor Sovietshu that he has no control over Empress Navier. She's her own independent person. She's smart, free-thinking, and clever. Meanwhile, Rashta is much more not that. She's very willing to obey whatever her emperor asks of her. And Emperor Sovietshu clearly likes control over people. Meanwhile, in Men of the Harem, we deal with the idea of control in a different manner. Emperor Hyacinth wants someone he loves to wait for 5 years while he marries someone he had to marry in order to gain control over the throne and the country that was almost taken from him. He put his country before his love, but still thinks he can grasp onto the person who used to love him. But when she moves on, he doesn't accept that, angry that she wouldn't choose him. And when she rises to power and asks her former partner to send her a consort from his kingdom, he is downright furious, and I love it. He's not only upset that she's making him choose for her, but also the fact that he no longer has control over her. She's her own person. Both of our empresses are cast aside, both by other women, and it's not either of these women's faults. Who they are don't really have anything to do with these things. Well, actually, Rashta isn't that great, and her attitude is problematic, especially when dealing with the whole divorce thing. She's basically being replaced with someone who kind of sucks. No. The problem arises with the men in these relationships, who, in fact, suck. They put themselves before their partners, believing 100% that they're in the right, because they want control. They want power. Over their kingdom, sure, but also over their partners. These empresses choose to forge their own paths. They choose to become their own people. Sure, they choose different paths. Empress Latil chooses the eye for an eye approach. Hyacinth rubbed his wedding in her face, so she rubs her consorts in his. Meanwhile, Empress Navier chooses to move on. Sure, it's relatively quickly, as she announces her marriage right when she accepts her divorce, which isn't a spoiler because it happens in the first episode, but still, these women choose their own path. They choose to be their own person, not tied down by anyone. They choose to be themselves. And it's great because of it. But that's just what I think. What about you? Have you read either of these series? And if so, what are your thoughts on them? Leave it in the comments below. And like always, thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you next week.